This is a podcast from Seven Vineyard.
We are going to talk this morning briefly around one of our three priorities that Claire talked about, which is spiritual emotional health. And I don't know about you, but I think it's a given that a church should contribute to our spiritual health. Is that fair? You'd expect a church to be interested in people's spiritual health, and that's a given. But I wonder whether you might wonder whether a church should be interested in helping people with their emotional health. I think the answer to that question is yes and no. And the reason I say that is because I think that sometimes we do need the expertise of a psychologist or a counsellor to deal with complex and persistent emotional challenges that we face. Some of you will know that I'm a physiotherapist. Claire and I have our own practice. She's a physio as well. And when we trained, we learned a whole range of professional skills that enable us to help people in a way that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have those skills. And indeed, we've honed them over the years. So hopefully when you come and pay to see a physiotherapist, you're getting some help that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get if you were just coming to see someone that wasn't trained physiotherapist, right? So it's the same, I think, with this. It's the same with this in as much that I think that there are things that we need professional help with. However, as a physiotherapist, what I am aware of is there's a good deal of common sense around keeping yourself physically healthy. And if you want to know more about that, we can talk about it. But here's the thing. There is basic stuff like stretching, stretching is good for me. Or just doing exercise. These are basic things that, you don't have to be a physiotherapist to understand. There are things that work for you that you have found over the years that, just keep you feeling fit and healthy and strong. And of course, you might pass on those kind of stories of how those things that you do have helped you from time to time with friends. Friends might say to you, "You look fit and strong. How do you work out? What does it mean for you to be healthy physically?" Some of you are going, "No, that's not." But the truth is that I think it's true for emotional health as well. There's a lot of common sense that we can apply to our lives, right? That we share in stories that we might observe about each other, that we might copy from one another. There are many things that we pick up as we grow older, as children and teenagers and young adults. Oh yeah, this is a good way to maintain peace of mind. This is a good way to deal with that negative experience. And so there's a lot of common sense that we can pass on from one another. And of course, one generation passes that stuff on to another. So yes, as a church, I think we can help one another with our emotional health. But there will be times where we have complex and persistent emotional needs that need some professional expertise. So not for a minute do I want you to think that we consider ourselves as a church to be able to solve every complex and persistent emotional problem. But nevertheless, there's a lot that we can share with one another that will help us maintain a healthy emotional state. But I do want to suggest to us that I do think it's hard to be spiritually healthy, or at least on the road to spiritual health, if you don't have a degree of emotional health. Because I think emotional health is a gateway to spiritual health. Someone once said that emotions are a better gateway to the spiritual dimension of our lives than our mental beliefs. So think about the last time you had a spiritual experience. Think about the last time you had a spiritual experience. An experience that took you beyond yourself, that connected you with the divine, that connected you with God, that a spiritual experience that really gave you a transformational moment in your life, that changed the direction of your thinking. Think of the last time you had that. Now, I would suggest that it is more likely that experience happened perhaps in a context like just now, where there was joyful music that you sang to, or perhaps where you watched the sunrise one morning last week, or perhaps the kindness of a stranger towards you whilst you travelled on the bus yesterday, or perhaps just the peace and quiet of having 30 minutes to yourself now your kids have gone back to school. I suspect that you have had more spiritual experiences through emotional experiences than listening to someone like me give a talk like this. That's because the power of emotion is a gateway to a spiritual experience. And it's not just positive emotional experiences as well, it's negative emotional experiences. They can also be a gateway to a spiritual dimension. I think it's Richard Rohr who says that love and experiences of great love and experiences of great loss lead us to spiritual experiences, because these are powerful emotions. And whatever the emotion, if emotions are the gateway to a spiritual experience rather than just mental assent to a set of beliefs, then we need to pay more attention to it as a church. So, when you're like me, if you are like me, you may have found yourself at times reacting to situations in your life with a surprising amount of emotion. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but where you ask yourself afterwards, wow, what was going on there? Or actually, more to the point, your wife says to you, what was going on there? Because you exploded in anger, or you fell apart and just kind of lost your sense of peace and a sense of mental strength. Maybe you were just crying uncontrollably. And you had this response to a situation which was far more than you would normally exhibit. I find myself doing this sometimes, and the question I have to ask myself is, what's driving that emotion? Where did that emotion come from? Now, as a person, I find it hard to ask for help. I've realised this. I am not very good at asking for help. So I guess part of it is down to the fact that I'm a kind of have-a-go guy, have-a-go hero, yeah, I can have a go at that, fix that problem, deal with this, deal with that. But the reality is that I can't, and often I get to the limits of my abilities very quickly, and it's usually, it can be anything really, but a typical example would be where I'm trying to fix a household chore, like there's something's gone wrong in the house, and I need to fix it, and then I realise I can't fix it, and I get frustrated, and I get angry, and it's just because I don't know how to ask for help. And I think some of it's a pride thing. I know it's a pride thing, actually, because when Claire and I are together, if we need help, then I usually encourage her to go and ask someone for help rather than myself. I genuinely do, and it's just it's a real weakness on my part, because what it means is it means I find it hard to actually ask for help, and maybe there's a bit of pride in there. Just like, yeah, I don't want to ask for help. I just want to be able to do it. I pride myself on being able to cope with most situations. But actually asking for help, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's often the most wise thing to do. So I have to ask myself, why is it? Why do I struggle to ask for help? I wonder whether you carry any emotional things like that yourself. That kind of, you kind of don't have a rational explanation. It's just an irrational response to a situation, and you don't quite know why it is. Maybe it's just something to do with my personality. Maybe it's something to do with something that happened to me when I was younger, or in my past. Not necessarily younger, it could have happened last week. But something which is affecting my ability to respond in a way that is, sensible and helpful and constructive. Now, the reason why I'm talking about our emotional and our spiritual health is because I think I own this, but someone else has said this, but our spiritual health will never outpace our emotional health. So if we want to be spiritually healthy, we need to, therefore, understand what our emotional health is like. And unfortunately, I think what we see is when religious people particularly think that they're spiritually healthy, but in reality they're not emotionally healthy. You see a real split in their behaviour. It leads to a lack of integrity. It leads to what we call hypocrisy. And I'll give you an example of this from the life of Jesus. So Matthew 23, verse 27-28. Okay, this is an account of Jesus' life. And Jesus says this to a group of people that are referred to as the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. And I might add, Jesus does not kind of mince his words when he talks to these people. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and you Pharisees, you hypocrites." Now, genuinely, if someone came up to you and said, "Karen, you are a hypocrite," that would be a horrible insult, wouldn't it? That would be something. Now, I know Karen very well. She's not a hypocrite at all. But the fact is that I was to say that to someone, it would be a very strong charge. It would be something that would be unpleasant and probably wouldn't be called for. But Jesus here, so don't miss the power of Jesus' words here. He says to these teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. And he says that more than once. So Jesus referred his most fierce criticism for the Pharisees and teachers of the law. Why is that? Well, I think it's because he saw this huge difference between what their outward spiritual health was looking like, which was, in their context, was obeying the law of Moses and actually inventing laws over and above the law of Moses to make themselves look righteous. And yet on the inside, their behavior just really doesn't match that spiritual health. So in other words, their emotional health's down here and their spiritual health's up here, and there's a big difference. And Jesus calls out that difference. And let me just explain the context a little bit. I said in last week's talk that in the 100-year period leading up to AD 70, the Jewish religion, and culture was being crushed by Roman occupation, Roman colonization, you might say. It was under so much pressure that society was splitting into factions. So you had lots of different factions within Judaism. And they were all attempting to survive this period of intense colonization and oppression by the Roman occupation. And the Pharisees and the religious lawyers were doubling down on their obedience to the Jewish law. I wonder whether they were saying, look, if we just keep the law to its nth degree, we'll preserve our Jewish identity, culture, and religion in spite of Roman secularization. If we're feeling all this pressure to conform to society and to society's norms have changed, so now we're going to feel the pressure to conform. Well, what we're going to do is, in order to preserve our culture, we're going to double down on it. We're going to double down on it. We're going to insist on every little detail of our law being kept. And that way we'll preserve the law. There was something about that in the Pharisees' response. And what the Pharisees and the Jewish lawyers were doing, they were keeping a code of conduct. Now, you might have to sign a code of conduct in your workplace. Does your employer require you to have a code of conduct? Yeah, some of you do. We have a code of conduct for the staff here at Seven. And that code of conduct requires people to behave in a certain way. If you are employed by this organisation, then we require this conduct from you. As a society, we have a code of conduct. It's our civil and criminal law, and we consent to that code of conduct. And in fact, we can even help shape that code of conduct through our democratic process. So we have a code of conduct. So we are all living within codes of conduct. And I would argue that the law that we have all agreed to, most of the time, I imagine, we are living within that code of conduct. We are living in such a way as to keep that code of conduct. No one is walking into a shop. I wouldn't recommend this. No one's going to walk down to Primark, walk out with clothes without paying for them. Why? Because our code of conduct requires us to not do that. And we have a mechanism by which we can force you to not do that by arresting you and putting you in jail if you do such a thing. So, of course, there was a code of conduct for the Jews, and the Pharisees were insisting that people keep it. But here's the thing about the Pharisees. They insisted that if a Jew failed to keep the code of conduct, this particular code of conduct, then there were eternal consequences for their actions. They leveraged their power by saying that God was on their side and that they had God's authority to insist that you keep this code of conduct. So the consequences weren't just that you'll get thrown into jail or that you'll be ostracized within your community, but that actually there are consequences in terms of your relationship with God going forward. So in other words, if you don't keep this code of conduct, then there's going to be eternal consequences when you die. That is an abuse of power. Because what they're doing is they're leveraging God's authority to get you to do something that they want you to do. Now, here's the thing. Jesus had severe criticism for this sort of behavior. But what we do understand from the Pharisees' behavior and from Jesus' criticism of it is that it's entirely possible to try and pursue what you think is spiritual health whilst you ignore your emotional health. But the outcome of that is often hypocrisy and a lack of integrity. And that's the trouble with religion. Religion can do that to us. We can be pursuing something that we think is right and moral and a code of conduct. We can adhere to it whilst really missing the point and being very different people inside. And so Jesus has really clear words for this, and I think for us as a church, we need to really think carefully about it. The hard reality is that if we want to be spiritually healthy, then we need to pursue emotional health with an equal passion, because I would argue that our spiritual health will never outpace our emotional health. Now, the image I would like you to think about today is the image of an iceberg. You know, so often we know what we see on the surface is not the full picture, right? An iceberg is only 10% of an iceberg floats above the water. So when you see an iceberg, there's another 90% of ice underwater. And that's a helpful metaphor for our own inner life, right? There's so much more below the surface that not everyone is going to see. And, you know, the truth is that we are all nice people, yeah? Most of us are nice people. Most of us behave in a way which is nice and polite and appropriate. Well, I mean, I can't say that I do most of it all the time. And my kids will tell you another, and my wife would, and those of you that know me well will know that I'm not like that. But the reality is that we're generally nice people. I've seen you all. When I come in here on a Sunday, you all walk in with smiles on your faces and you greet each other with warmth and generosity, and you've got your best side on, right? Even if you walked in the door feeling like really grumpy, you can manage to squeeze out a smile because we're at church. And Christians are nice people, right? I mean, Christians are nice people, and frankly, it's a nice context to be in. Like, you go into any church in the city, hopefully you're going to find nice people that are going to treat you kindly, generously, and be genuinely interested in you. Why? Because there's a culture around Christianity about being nice and kind and generous. But the reality is that we don't know everything about each other. And we don't know, sometimes, everything about ourselves. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't know everything that's going on in me. As I said to you just now, I find that sometimes I react in a way that I'm even surprised myself. Like, whoa, what's going on there? Why did I just lose my rag with so-and-so? Why did I just feel really anxious in that moment? What on earth is going on there? I'm asking myself the question because I don't know the answer. So we can struggle to understand each other, and we can also struggle to know ourselves. And over again, Jesus challenged his followers to examine those things and pay attention to those things. So Jesus never said, just skate over the surface, remain in the shallows. Don't worry about going deep and dealing with some of that stuff that, really does shape us. He says this in John 8:31-32. And remember, Jesus' teaching was all about, Jesus' teaching, I was going to really deliver you a sucker line there that no one has ever told you, right? Jesus' teaching, put it in a word, it's this. Now, I can't do that, but here's what I do see in Jesus' teaching, is Jesus' teaching was always asking questions. He was always asking questions of his listeners, like, what do you think about this? Like, he forces you, he spoke in parables to force you to think about what he was saying. He never said it kind of clear and plain. In fact, often his disciples would, we've got one record of his disciples saying to him, why won't you just speak plainly to us? You speak in stories and we don't quite understand what you mean. And that's because he was forcing people to think through his teaching. But he says this, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. What is Jesus talking about? Well, I'm going to just pitch that I think Jesus is talking about the truth setting us free from those things that control us that sometimes we don't even know anything about. From the moment we were conceived, our environment has shaped us. When you were being carried in your mother's womb, your environment was shaping you, whatever that was, positive or negative. So from the moment we've conceived, our environment shapes us and changes us and affects us. And so we behave in ways that sometimes we don't fully understand. Some experiences are more formative than others. Some are good and some are bad. I'm sure that all of us have places in our past that we might celebrate and go, that was a really formative part of my life. I'm so glad that I had that relationship, or I was raised in that family, or I did this as a child, or I took that opportunity that presented itself to me. So many of our experiences form us for the good. Some of our experiences, unfortunately, form us, they're bad experiences. You know, that we've suffered in certain ways that have shaped us as well. So both good and bad experiences will shape us. And here's the thing. You know, there are things that we probably have in our lives that we're slightly embarrassed or ashamed of. And, you know, one of the best things that you can do, one of the funnest things, if you've never done this, go to the pub and just you know, talk to your friends and talk about your greatest mistakes or regrets that you have in life. You're going to have such a good night. We don't do it, do we? We don't sit in the pub and talk about the things of which we're ashamed or embarrassed. Yeah, I mean, gosh. I don't know where to begin. You know, I could tell you so many things that I'm thinking, oh, I'm embarrassed by that, or I'm ashamed of that. You know, the reality is that there are things that we just don't tell each other because of embarrassment and shame. No. No, well, Claire and I had to clear the house the other night because it was Jake's 20th birthday and he had his mates stay over and stuff. So we went and stayed with Anna and our friend Anna. And over breakfast the next morning, I was recounting a dream that I had where we were at a Christian Vineyard conference, and I had to, I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, but I had to go to the front. That's right, I climbed over a table to get to the front to get my food first. And then I was told by an official at the conference that I was not able to do that anymore, and they wanted to take my plate out of my hand. And I was like so embarrassed because everyone there was laughing at me. And I remember, and I recounted this to you, and now I'm embarrassed telling you about this to you because it's like, what's going on there, you know? I remember walking out of the building with everyone laughing at me, and it was people I knew and loved, and they were all just going, "Oh, Owen, you're such an idiot. You're stupid," you know, doing all that kind of stuff. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's embarrassing." And I feel that shame even telling you. And I remember telling Claire and Anna about it over breakfast, and like, why am I telling you this dream? I should have just kept that to myself. But anyway, you know, there are things that we just don't share with one another because we're embarrassed and ashamed. But here's the thing, we make meaning from our experiences, and we make vows from our experiences. And those vows are, I will never do that again. Or I will do that again because it gained certain positive experiences. We make vows. Whether we like it or not, we make vows. And we say, I will not do this. Is there anything in your life that you will not do? Those are things that are powerfully shaping you. And you might not know why. You might know why. But there are events and experiences that you've had that mean that you will not do something because you vowed you will not do it. And those things can be good and bad. So, for example, let me give you an example. You might have learned as a child from your parents to suppress conflict. All right, so you might have learned one way or another that you need to suppress conflict, so don't engage in conflict. But instead of dealing with it, you suppress it. So, I don't know, 35 years later, you when you have conflict, what you do is you don't engage with conflict in a constructive way. You just distance the person you're in conflict with, and you just don't spend time with them. And you realise that's killing your marriage, or it's affecting your relationship with colleagues at work, because our formative experiences shape our present behaviour sometimes. And although it's not exclusively within the first 30 years of our life, you know, there are things that perhaps only in the last year may well still be really had a formative effect on you and actually shaping your response to life now. But there are things that particularly happen in the first 10, 15, 20 years. It's because our brains are so plastic. Now, plastic, that metaphor is not very helpful because plastic's quite hard, isn't it, normally? But actually what it means is plastic is malleable, it's formable. So in the first 10, 15 years of our life, like everything that we are going to become kind of is very shapeable in that time. It's very malleable in that time. Our brains are very plastic. So very often what's happened in our first 10, 15, 20 years of life actually has a lasting effect across our life. And the problem is that as we get older, those experiences and those behaviours become harder and often irreversible. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about when he says, the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. It will help you break those patterns of behaviour that have emerged from certain activities or experiences in your life if you pay attention to them. But what do? We just skate along the surface of our life and we never connect with the reality of those things going on in our lives. And then you come to church and you go, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, so I need to behave like this. And then you realise that you can't behave like that because actually there's stuff in you that is actually shaping you and forming you much more powerfully than just a requirement to behave in a certain way. And so that's why the difference between our spiritual and emotional lives is quite critical sometimes. But we can change. Henry Cloud and John Townsend wrote a book called Boundaries, and they said this in this book: we change our behaviour when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. We change our behaviour when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. And I noticed this as a physio, just briefly. When some people will come to me and they say, I've had this problem for like 18 months. And I go, why have you only just come to a physiotherapist with it now then? Well, it's become so great that I have to do something about it. I've been able to live with that pain for a long time, but now it's too great. So I need to sort it out, and then hopefully we sort it out. But here's the thing, we can do that with emotional pain as well. So for many of us, we live with emotional pain, and we take painkillers that help us deal with that pain. And often those painkillers are things that release the pleasure chemicals, the endorphins in our bodies. So that's TV, books, sport, work, religion, shopping. Yes, I said religion. Anything that distracts us from the reality that we're facing and fills our time so we don't have to deal with that cause of pain. And that's what we do. We effectively anaesthetize ourselves against our pain until we're ready to deal with it. And sometimes that's the right thing to do in a controlled setting, you know. If someone has back pain, they do need to take painkillers until the body starts to resolve. And sometimes we do need to do things to keep that pain under control until we are ready to deal with that pain. From an emotional perspective, that's where I'm saying we're getting out of our territory there. We need to get into the territory of professionals who can help us with that sort of thing, psychologists and counsellors. But, you know, there is so much that we can do as a church together in the sharing of common sense and very simple ways of living that enable us to deal with some of that stuff. And we don't have to hit rock bottom before we deal with it. Now, I know that for some, the theory of addiction is that actually you do have to hit rock bottom before you're prepared to do something about it. And again, I'm not going to go there. But what I would say is that to us as a community, there are things that we can share that might help. And we don't have to plummet to the depths before we actually start helping one another. Does that make sense? And particularly as a church. I mean, honestly, if we just skate around on the surface and pretend to be spiritual and try and behave ourselves and look nice and behave in a certain way, then great. I mean, fine, if that's what you want. But I don't think that's very helpful. And it doesn't really make sense of the gospel. So you could probably do that at your local cricket club or your David Lloyd. No one's going to worry about you there. You can skate along the surface there, but in the context of a church where the basis of our church is the gospel of Jesus, that the truth will set you free, well, what does that actually look like? What does it look like for us to do that? Well, we want to just share one way in which that can look through our relationships with one another. Dan's just going to join me, and we're just going to briefly tell you about an experience that we've had together that's helped us deal with this. Is that right, Dan?
Yes, fine, yeah, hi.
So we're mates, we've been mates for years, and a while back we actually formed a triplet with a friend of ours called Mao, and the three of us spent, 9 months probably, maybe longer, meeting together once a week on Zoom, asking ourselves 4 basic questions. And those 4 basic questions were?
The questions were, what's gone well in the last week or since we last met? Where have you got stuck? Which linked with stuff Owen's been talking about, patterns where you want to be different but can't, areas of dysfunction. And then the third one was, where else is God getting your attention? So that could be just through something you've read or something that someone said to you, but just a chance to reflect on that. And then the last one was, what are you pressing into or what are you going to do about it? So we would give each other about 10 minutes to kind of share, and we'd just take it in turns to ask each other questions. So it's kind of a very informal peer coaching type arrangement where you're in a non-judgmental environment where you can ask those kind of questions. And I think for us, I think we've been friends for about 23 years now, but being in that environment just gave us a rhythm and an opportunity to really, I think, start to be honest about some of the stuff, some of the mess, some of the dysfunctions in our emotions and in our relationships and in our lives, and it was so helpful in that regard, just to have that discipline of meeting weekly or fortnightly and saying, okay, so what's gone well? Great. But, that's the good stuff. But where are you getting stuck? And so if I had shared with Owen, that I'd noticed myself distancing myself from my family when I was upset, or not being able to engage with something because it was too difficult, then the next time we met, he could ask me about that. Or I could say, what hasn't gone well this last week is I've noticed the same thing going again. And often I wouldn't know why I was doing that, but Owen would be able to kind of ask a follow-up question of, where do you think that's coming from? Or when did you notice it? Or was there anything that you did differently? And just in that, again, kind of very non-judgmental environment to ask each other those questions was amazing. And I've then gone on to do it with several other triplets, and I know you have as well. So it's a really simple model. What it needs is a little bit of commitment, because you do have to kind of commit into a rhythm of meeting and fitting that into life. But I think the payoff is absolutely worth it. And it also needs a little bit of vulnerability, to answer those questions honestly, to be able to go to places that are a bit uncomfortable and say, yeah, I did this again. I acted in that way, or I said that thing, or I didn't say that thing. And the more vulnerable you're able to be with each other, the more rewarding and the bigger the payoff. So that was what I got out of it a bit. But yeah, what did you get anything out of it?
Yeah, I got all of that, but I also really loved the fact that it was defined. So we did it for an hour a week or an hour a fortnight. It was no more. So for instance, if we go to the pub, and we might spend 2 or 3 hours there, but honestly, if we were at that level the whole time, I'd be exhausted by the end of the evening. And also, we wouldn't have been able to talk about football and other things that we really love talking about together, right? So what was really nice about it was you have 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes to answer questions from one of the guys. So you're in you're a group of 3. So one person times the 10 minutes. One person is asked the questions, the other person gets to ask. And no one is an expert, so you're not allowed to offer advice. So that's a really big rule on this. You don't offer advice, because obviously it can just become a sort of an advice fest kind of thing. It's about you kind of just talking about what's going on. And very often the most common response that anyone I've been in a triplet with says at the end of their session or 10 minutes is, oh, that was really helpful. I would never have come up with that if I hadn't talked about it. It's in the sharing that you kind of find your own solutions. So in many ways, that was what helped me. I think that I've done it since we stopped doing ours, and I do it with Rick and Kevin, and we've done it now for 3.5 years. 3.5 years.
You're still not perfect.
Well, no, of course, and that's the thing. We're not trying to be perfect.
Yeah.
What we're actually trying to do is just live life together. So when I see Rick or Kevin here on a Sunday and we wander up to each other and say hi, I know what's going on in their life. I know what's going on in their life, and I don't feel the need to kind of go deep when we're chatting like this, because we're just chatting because we know that we've got that time to chat. So we might laugh about whatever else is going on in our lives, but we don't have. But we have the sense of connection, and I think that probably, Dan, is the thing that I got most out of it, was the feeling connected. I didn't realise that if women in the room will know this already because it's just innate to you. But when you share openly and vulnerable with people, you feel connected to them, don't you? All the ladies are going, yes. And the guys are going, really? That's a new idea. I'd never thought about that before. And I think that was what really I felt, oh, I don't feel lonely. I don't feel isolated. I feel connected and known. And that was a really big deal.
Yeah, and 2 other quick thoughts that have come to mind as you've said that is, I think as a natural kind of people pleaser, someone who avoids conflict, actually it was a really helpful way for me to gradually learn that in being vulnerable, in sharing my mistakes and staying where I was stuck, that actually what I received was connection and not distance or judgment. And that was just kind of an inbuilt assumption that had come from lots of things in growing up, and where I had sought appreciation and affection and stuff. So it was a really practical way to gradually learn that better. And the other thing was, it forced me to reflect. And just having that rhythm, I think it's very, very easy to kind of coast along or drift along and often not even know how I am. I think when people ask me, how are you doing, it's actually quite a difficult question to answer sometimes, because I haven't taken the time to actually work out how I am. So having that built-in habit and those questions to reflect on before we met, because this is the other thing, is we'd actually just jot down some notes or email each other with a few thoughts. So actually that was often as beneficial as the conversation itself, was just the reflection.
The discipline of reflection, yeah, absolutely. And if you journal, you'll know that some of this, you'll be like, oh yeah, no, I get that from journaling. All I would say to you is, when you journal, the only person you're conversing with is yourself and God. When you're forced to share some of that with someone else, it changes it, it multiplies it, it really grows it. So I would encourage you, if you're like, yeah, I get that from journaling, it's like, well, try it with a couple of people, because actually I think you'll get even more out of it. Here's the thing, I don't think we're saying that you need to be an expert on this, do you? And we want people, we did it as mates, and if you're thinking I'd like to do that, I would encourage you to not rely on the church to organise it for you. What I would encourage you to do is think of two people that you get on well with and ask them if they'd like to do it with you. And you might do it, we do it fortnightly at the moment, Rick, Kevin and I, because it works well. It's only an hour a fortnight. Honestly, we can make that happen. And we don't do it in person either, we do it on Zoom. So it's easy to do. But it's, in terms of cost-benefit ratio, guys, it's kind of like loads of benefit, not a lot of cost. It really does. It really helps. So we would encourage you just to find two people you like. Now, it might be people that aren't part of Seven, maybe people that aren't Christians. That's absolutely fine. And if there's any sense of discussion, you don't have to ask yourself, what's God been getting your attention? You can just say, what's getting your attention at the moment? But the point is that the same principles are working out. Is that fair, Dan? Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that's...
Yeah. So we just want to encourage you to do it. Because your emotional life is your gateway to your spiritual dimension of life, okay? And you can disagree with me on that, and so I'm not saying that as like a fact, but that's my experience and my opinion, and certainly the opinion of many writers. But if you are thinking to yourself, oh, I've never thought about dealing with my emotional life, my emotional health, this is just one simple way to start. There are many other ways, but this is just one simple way. So we offer that to you. Thanks, Dan. Why don't we just pray together? Thank you for our emotions. Thank you for our emotional lives. And some of us would rather not have emotions because they terrify us and upset us and all that. Some of us are struggling with experiences that are too painful to even begin to unearth. Give us the wisdom, we pray, Holy Spirit, to work out what to do in the situation, whether that's to get into a little triplet like this with some mates, or whether that is to seek the help of a counsellor or a psychologist to deal with stuff. But Lord, we just pray that that today we as a community would be more than just our membership of the David Lloyd Club, or more than just our membership of this yoga society or whatever. May it be a bit more than that. May it be a community where we grow spiritually and emotionally to a place of health and continuing health. And we ask for your help in doing that. So give us wisdom to do that, we pray. And give us connections to do that in Jesus' name. We pray. Amen.